Hi, everybody. We're live here with a chat with some participants from our recent EcoCraft project. I'm Tammy Sutherland. I'm with the Manitoba Arts Council. We're located on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. And I am here today with Erica Roseblum and Debra Francis. They are an artist and a scientist who have been part of our EcoCraft project. It was a year-long collaboration, or roughly a year, between 11 pairs of artists and scientists. And they were working on sharing their research and their studio practices as it related to climate change. And we have an exhibition up at the C2 Center for Craft right now that shows the work of 9 of those pairings. And Debra's one of the artists in the show. So I'm really glad to welcome them here to this live chat today. And we're going to get a bit of a chance to go behind the scenes of their collaboration and hear a little bit more about what went on there and what their research was about and how their collaboration unfolded. So maybe I'll start with you, Erica. If you could tell us a little bit about your research and how it relates to EcoCraft and maybe what got you interested in the project.
Sure. So I'm a physical oceanographer. That doesn't mean much to many people. So basically, I'm really interested in how the ocean moves and evolves in time and space. And I'm more looking at it in terms of the math and physics perspective rather than biology and chemistry. And my focus is in the Arctic Ocean. So what I'm really interested in is understanding the interaction between the frozen water on top, the sea ice, and the liquid water below, how that's changing over the last few decades as the climate has been changing and the globe has been warming. And how well that's represented in climate models that are projecting where we think we're moving towards in the future. So I use a combination of different approaches. I like to use math and physics, just writing down equations. I use instruments that are deployed all across the Arctic Ocean over the last few decades. And I also like to look at data sets from scientists that lived on the ice back in the 70s. And I'm using satellite data to look at how the sea ice cover is changing over the last few 30 years, 40 years or so. So that's what I do, and that's my focus. Your other question, now I'm like, okay, there was 3 questions there. What were the other 2?
I guess second part of that question was just what got you interested in being part of the EcoCraft project?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, so it was kind of brought to me on a whim because I've been doing different outreach activities, and somebody thought I might be interested in doing this. And I really value doing projects that kind of stretch across different disciplines and reaching and talking to people who understand things really well, but are in another world from me. And I always feel that we can really learn from each other in that way. So I thought it'd be really interesting to see and try to kind of mix and learn from somebody who comes from a really different world and perspective and see what we could learn from each other.
Very cool, thank you. So Debra, why don't we move over to you and tell us a little bit about your creative practice and what brought you to EcoCraft?
Well, I would describe myself as a bookbinder and a book artist. And I'm trained as a bookbinder, but I like to kind of play with materials and kind of stretch the idea of what a book is. So a lot of my books are more like sculptures, and I like to use them as kind of representative of the ideas that books kind of conjure up for people. And I guess with the EcoCraft project, my interest of late, I've been doing a lot of my own fish skin tanning. So I have a real interest in the waterways here that in Manitoba and Ontario that I fish in. And I like to tan my own fish skin so that as a sustainable resource that I use in my books. And so in coming to EcoCraft, I love the idea of looking at how climate change is affecting the waters that I love and and explore all the time.
Okay. So I'm curious, hearing about your very different practices. Can you tell us a little bit about, I know when we were matching the artists initially, it felt like the two of you would make an interesting pairing. And I think the commonality that we saw really was that connection to the aquatic ecosystem and just understanding that. Could you tell us a little bit about how your collaboration unfolded, what it was like when you first met and how you ended up working together?
Did you want me to start, Erica?
Yeah.
At first I thought it was a big wide gap because, she's up and, studying Arctic sea ice and I'm more freshwater, and it felt like, but as soon as we met in person, we actually had a very instant connection, and we've really been able to get to know each other really well. And and I'm glad it wasn't such a, an obvious connection. Like if I would have been connected with somebody who studied fish here, that might have felt more obvious. But because it was, I'm just going to push my cat off. Because it was less obvious, I feel like there was more room to explore and to, I feel like it expanded my own views more than if it would have been really obvious. And so when we first met, Erica was like great at helping me understand what it was that she does. And she had a little experiment ready. Our very first Zoom meeting, she had a little experiment with blue ice cubes and salt water and fresh water, and then just helped me to understand, the different, the processes that she studied, but in a really approachable way. And so I feel like it really pushed me to think about what I was doing in a completely different way than if I would have had, a really obvious partner. And I guess the other thing I would say too about when we first connected was the one thing that came out right away was the idea of story, and how we both really like the idea of story. That was a definite through line right from the beginning, because obviously with books and what I do, I'm always like, books tell stories, but Erica also, as a scientist, wants to communicate her research through story. And that was just a really cool initial connection that we just were like, yeah, like I was saying, for me, when I'm hearing stuff about science, when somebody tells me a story, it really connects with me much more than if I, am just going to read research, right? So I'd say that was the first real strong connection between us.
Yeah, and maybe I'll add to that too, because as you say that, I start to think of like, okay, we came together and there was like a structure to it of like, I'm going to tell you about my research and then you're going to like make art about it. And like, so we came together and that was the starting point. But very quickly, I felt like it was kind of wanting to stretch out further than that. And I think like one part of that was totally like discussing how we were both connecting to storytelling, and how that is a really big part of how I like to think of how science works and how to do science and how to share science. But I also felt like a really interesting part for me. So one fun thing, so we started these initial conversations over Zoom, and then Debra invited me over for dinner with a few of her artist friends to share the same experiment and have this discussion. And I got to kind of watch artists interact and think about like, okay, I have this information, I have these tools of like how I approach and express things, and like, how am I going to do this? And I just saw all these other overlaps between science and art that I definitely didn't expect, just in terms of like, okay, we're going to do an experiment, or just being extremely open to the way things can evolve, where the crux of it, going back to what Debra said, is like, we're trying to tell a story and share a narrative. And I thought that was really cool all through the end. In the beginning, when we're just like, okay, experimenting, how is this going to go? But then also getting to be a part a little bit of like the evolution of it becoming its own thing. And like, okay, we planted seeds at the beginning, and then it kind of grew into this whole thing that ended up with this beautiful installation that's just like wild.
Yeah, so I'm curious about, you're talking about, both of you very much talking about storytelling. And I think a lot of people might think, when they think of books, obviously they're thinking quite a bit about text. And of course, as a bookbinder, and I've seen your piece many times, Debra, it's obviously communicating a story with very, with materials and with techniques and with the installation. Can you tell us a bit about what the story is that your piece is getting at?
Yeah, I think that when you see pages, there's a lot of pages that are represented in the piece, and to me, pages represent like the basic. When you see the pages, you're recognizing that there's a story there. They represent history. There's an ancientness about it. The way I structured it is to have it look like an iceberg, which is, Erica's research is up in the Arctic. And yet the sturgeon have almost like a burnt look or like a very aged look. And so that seemed to really fit with the idea of warming. So yeah, the icebergs aren't going to be that gold and brown color of the sturgeon, but that actually is quite symbolic of the warming sort of nature. And then even in the other materials that I chose to use, the paper, I aged it. I used some massa paper that I painted beeswax on, and then I let it bubble. And so at the surface, if you look closely, has all these elements of aging to them. So I feel like the story is in the materials that I choose and how I present them. And and I think, and the fact that there's 7 of them too, I'm representing the 7 continents. And so there's layers of meaning that we could go into, but it would probably, another cool thing about this whole project has been that as I've shared these ideas with people, like other people see things in it and they'll say, Erica was commenting on the glass, some sort of, I don't know if you remember that comment, Erica, when you saw it, like, so things that I might not have necessarily planned, but other people can see these connections and are making these connections.
Yeah, right, with the glass. I thought that was really stunning. I wish we had like a picture of it now so we could like point to it. Like, it's just really, really stunning. But I don't want to explain your work, I'm just like, it's so cool. But yeah, because she has like this glass that's got this interesting texture to it. It really does. It has this like water feel and ice element to it. But then of course the fish is extending deeper below it like an iceberg would, and it being kind of calmer below the surface while the burnt edges are on top. And I felt like that really resonated with the science too, because we see most of global warming, it's really happening at the surface above the water, where the water is kind of slowing things down. It's got this large heat capacity that's kind of gathering all this heat and slowing down what we're seeing at the surface. And then you have all these different shadings of it too, because you have the glass and the light above coming in at these different angles. It's really stunning.
Yeah, I loved that when you explained that, because that makes so much sense. But and then the other thing that's kind of interesting about the content, initially when I was like working on early prototypes of this, when I was looking through Erica's papers, I loved the look of the equations. There's these long formulas and they're just beautiful. Like, if you just like, I don't know, I did do physics and math and all of that back in the day, but there is a real beauty to the actual formulas. So I actually wrote them out on the papers, and was going to use them and have the formulas be a part of that, because I thought, well, this is the research that's gone into it. Anyways, I had done them with black ink that I thought would be color fast. It disappeared in the other processes that I did. And so it was like, it looked really cool before I heated it, and then I lost them all. But when I told Erica about that, what did you say?
I thought that was so cool. I really loved it, because I thought, like, well, equations, that's our way to kind of try to understand nature, right? It's our way to kind of speak to the data and get some words out. Oh, there it is. That's the top of it. That's cool. That was exciting. But yeah, at the end of the day, the equations, they're not really anything, right? You're left with nature. They do kind of run away and slide off, and you're left with what the earth really is. And so I thought that kind of, even though you can't see it now in the representation, it's gone, but it's kind of folded in this narrative of how we evolved through this process. And I thought that was really beautiful.
Yeah, I loved it when you said that, because I thought, oh, that kind of sucks. Like, I took all this time to write out all these equations, and then they disappeared. But they are in there somewhere. Like, it was a part of the process that I went through to get to where I ended up. And I just love the different discussions like that we could have as I was, playing around with ideas, and being able to come back to you and say, like, does this make any sense? I just off in my own la la land, so that was a really great part of the process.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that too.
Wow. So I'm curious, like, just in the collaboration, were there any surprises for you at all in how it unfolded, or any, I don't know, challenges that you overcame? Anything you'd like to share about that?
I wouldn't say there was anything that, I found it really rich. I loved being able to have Erica over and introduce her to some of my friends, and kind of, like she talked about, just to extend that collaboration a bit. And I feel like, just even broader than that, I feel like I was able to talk to so many people about this project. It just seemed to be something that was, like, easy to share with other people, and people would speak into it in ways that really informed the direction that I took. One example is when, like, where as far as with working with the sturgeon, I was teaching a class, and I had the prototype, the first one, and I was showing them and talking about the project and saying, this is what I'm thinking, it kind of looks like an iceberg, and, talking about Erica's research. And this woman said, oh, well, that sturgeons are an indicator species, right? And I said, what? No, I don't even, I've never heard that before. And so she says, yeah, like, they're studied, they're studied here so that, because you can tell what's happening in your environment really easily, right? And that just became something that, like, that really connected it for me. That's when, and that was just such a, that was kind of random, but not really. But just to be able to have those conversations, and that felt like a turning point in the direction I was going, because then it really made sense that, Erica's work, what she studies, is an indicator of what's happening globally, but we don't see it as much right here because we're further south, and the impacts aren't as severe right now, but they're an indicator of what's happening globally. And I felt like that was such a beautiful connection, like the Manitoba connection, to connect it to the sturgeon that's found in our prairie waters. That felt like, that's when it all kind of came together, because we were supposed to have a Manitoba focus, but I'm working with somebody from, the Arctic, right? So that just really brought it together. And that was one of those things that was just like a conversation. And I had so many conversations like that with so many people, like artists, scientists, family, friends. It was a project that people are interested in, and it just there was so many opportunities to talk about it.
Do you think, Erica, that obviously, your work has deeply influenced this work by Debra? Do you think there's ways in which working on a project like this changes the way that you're working or thinking about your work?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think I saw, like, a lot of the overlaps kind of helped me see, in terms of how Debra works and how open she is to how the project is going to develop on its own. I think that kind of helps me in my work when I think about that. It's, you come in with an idea or a thought, but it's really going to be whatever it is. And that really resonated with me. But I also feel, it's really interesting to watch this process so, like, closely. I really got to see it from, like, hey, hello, and this is what I do and this is what you do. Let's figure something out, to it eventually, you know, going into a gallery and becoming this physical thing. You know, I mean, I don't know how that's going to influence my work, but it was really striking. So I'm here. We actually went to the gallery just a few days ago together, and it was really something to see from idea to these like stunning objects. There they are. And that it's really something. And also, you know, knowing all these different interesting conversations that Debra has had along the way, and knowing now that there are people visiting it and it's striking them and bringing something to a three-dimensional world, I found that really, really striking for someone who's, you know, I mostly produce things that are on two-dimensional paper. You know, it's not something you can see, something that stands before you, something that evolves depending on how you look at it, and can reach so many people on a deep level. I don't know what that's gonna evolve into, but it's definitely something that's kind of sitting in my stomach now, for what that's worth.
So we're almost at the end of our time here. I don't know if there's any last resource you'd like to leave us with, or something that could help us learn more about the kind of research you're doing or the kind of work you're doing. If there's anything you want to leave us with.
Oh gosh, an interesting resource. You know, I think, well, Google is a great place to start, and look at sea ice from the 1970s to the 2000s. You can look at NASA sea ice and see the evolution for yourself. I think it's really striking to see what satellites see from space, and it's just a clear image of seeing the Arctic almost completely white all across for an entire year in the early 80s, late 70s, and see where we are now. And you don't really need words. You can just see it visually and see that the world's changing, the Arctic's changing really, really fast. And it's important that we understand it and try to do something to mitigate it.
Thank you. Debra, is there anything final you'd like to leave us with?
I don't know. I guess I just want to say how much I've appreciated this opportunity to do this project. I feel like it's challenged me in new ways. I'm so glad that I got to meet Erica and that we could work together. And I'm excited about the whole project, and feel like it's such a great way to get people to have conversations that, you know, like you hear this stuff, and I feel like it's just, I think coming at it from a completely different perspective like this really does open up those conversations, you know?
Well, thank you both so much for sharing your research, sharing your studio work with us. We're totally inspired as a staff by what we've seen out of the collaborations. And yeah, we're thrilled that these conversations are happening, and they're happening here and happening in our gallery. So people out there, if you want to see Debra's work in person, it's EcoCraft is on till the end of October. We're open Wednesday to Saturday, noon to 4 p.m. So come on down and visit the show. Great. Thanks so much, you two.